In the past 20 years, Disney has put out an abundance of famous and infamous box office flops. From failed franchise starters like The Lone Ranger and John Carter, to disappointing sequels like The Marvels and Dial of Destiny, to failed one-off adaptations like the topic of today's video, the BFG. The BFG is a movie that Disney dumped tons of money into making and marketing, but unfortunately, it failed to hit at the theater and lost the company millions of dollars. So join me today as I examine the history of this film, offer up some theories on why it failed, and give my personal thoughts on the project. Just as a quick recap, the BFG is the 1982 children's novel written by Roald Dahl, and is a story about a friendly giant known as the BFG, who collects and gives good dreams to children and an orphan named Sophie. Together, the BFG and Sophie, with help from the Queen of England, rid the world of the child-eating giants. There was one movie made in 1989, however, it was animated and was a television movie. So this is a story that had yet to hit the big screen until 2016. A live-action adaptation of the BFG has been in the works since the early 90s. Originally, producers Frank Marshall and Kathleen Kennedy brought the idea for an adaptation to Paramount Pictures in 1993, and Paramount bought the rights soon after. A script was written by married screenwriting duo Robin Swacord and Nicholas Kazan, who had previously adapted another Roald Dahl classic to the big screen, that being 1996's Matilda. Around 1998, iconic actor Robin Williams was brought in for read-throughs of the script, playing the title character. It seemed like the perfect team-up, since at the time, Williams was coming off of two other highly successful family films with Miss Doubtfire and Aladdin. However, due to the technical limitations at the time, the studio had a hard time finding a director who would be interested due to the high production demands. More screenwriters were brought in for rewrites, such as Monty Python alum Terry Jones and the writer behind Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Ed Solomon. But the project lingered in development hell until the rights expired and returned to Dahl's estate. The project would be revived in 2011, when DreamWorks swooped up the rights, with Marshall and Kennedy producing once again. This time, Kennedy attached E.T. screenwriter Melissa Matheson to pen the script. Once the script was completed, Steven Spielberg was attached to helm the project, and casting went underway. Mark Rylance was set to play the title character, and Ruby Barnhill was cast as the lead Sophie. Now I know what you're thinking. The title says Disney's failed next big thing, but I said DreamWorks bought the rights and were making the picture. Well, this is where things get tricky. In March of 2015, the studio behind the Narnia movies, Walden Media, agreed to co-produce and co-finance the film with DreamWorks and Amblin Entertainment. However, a month later, Walt Disney Studio, which was under prior agreement to distribute the film through its Touchstone Pictures banner, also joined the production as a co-producer and co-financer. Disney then shifted the film from a Touchstone Pictures release to a Walt Disney Pictures production instead. A quick moment of silence for Touchstone Pictures. Gone, but not forgotten. Additionally, due to reconstructing at DreamWorks and Amblin Entertainment's parent company, Amblin Partners, the DreamWorks name was dropped from the picture altogether. So it was officially a Disney and Walden Media product. The film went into production in March of 2015, shooting in Vancouver, Canada. It wrapped in June of the same year and was sent off to post-production, where the abundant visual effects were done by Weta Digital. By the time the film was finished, its budget was estimated to be around $140 million. And that's not including marketing, distribution, or the theater's cuts, which means it would need to double to triple this figure in order to break even. The BFG hit theaters on July 1st of 2016, scoring an opening weekend gross of $18 million, and debuting at number 4 in the box office right behind Finding Dory, The Legend of Tarzan, and The Purge election year. In the US, it went on to make $55 million, and overseas it secured $139 million for a total worldwide gross of $195 million. That's a pretty good take, but since the budget of this film was so huge, it didn't matter. According to The Hollywood Reporter, the BFG lost Disney somewhere between $90 to $100 million. However, the box office is only half the battle. How did the film fare review-wise? Reviews for the film ranged from mixed to mostly positive. The critic score on Rotten Tomatoes boasts a fresh 74%, but the audience score shows a rotten 57%. Additionally, the film currently holds a 6.3 out of 10 on IMDb, a 66% score on Metacritic, and a 2.7 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So the reviews weren't all bad, and the film had the name of one of the biggest directors of all time attached. Yet, it still failed to make a splash at the theater. That, of course, invites the question of what went wrong. When it comes to Disney's The BFG, it is a case of self-sabotage. As I mentioned earlier, the studio dropped the film just 2 weeks after they dropped Finding Dory. Just for reference, Finding Dory grossed $135 million in its opening weekend, and over $1 billion in its entire box office run. The same weekend that the BFG was released, Finding Dory made $41 million. This Pixar film grossed over twice the amount that the BFG did on its third weekend in theaters. Now, why in the world would Disney do this? Why didn't they space out their big releases more? Well, the answer is simply, they couldn't. Disney dropped 13 movies in the year of 2016, and most of these were attached to already established brands and IPs. They knew which ones were going to perform well, and they made sure to space those out from each other and give them the most desirable release dates. With films like The BFG and The Finest Hour, that were more of a gamble, naturally they landed on the least desirable release dates or on dates that coincided with other big releases. No matter when Disney dropped the BFG, it was going to intersect with one of these other films. I think the biggest issue with the BFG was the budget. It was simply too high for the potential pop culture relevance that the story and name has in the modern era. Charles Bramsco from Rolling Stone had a great observation that I wanted to include. Consider this, Roald Dahl's book was published in 1982, meaning many of the kids who grew up on it would be slightly too young to have movie-aged going children of their own. Situated right where Gen X ends and the millennial territory begins, the novel's core fan base is currently in their mid to late 20s and early 30s. If Disney was gunning for the nostalgia dollar of this adaptation of a kiddie cult classic, holding off for another 8 to 10 years could have made a world of difference. As it was, the film may have fallen into the middle of a generation gap. There's also a handful of smaller issues with the film that on their own probably didn't contribute much, but when combined all together crafted the perfect storm for this to flop. For example, the story is a very British one, so audiences in the US didn't necessarily connect with it or are totally familiar with it. This is evident by the difference between the US gross and the worldwide gross. A similar thing happened with 2011's The Adventures of Tintin. I mean, just look at this difference. You could also blame the name. For many people who aren't familiar with the source material, BFG could stand for anything. Even when you throw a giant on the poster, the F could stand for something completely different. Perhaps it may have had more success if they called it The Big Friendly Giant, but who knows? It reminds me a lot of 2015's The Man from U.N.C.L.E., where although the name worked in a different decade, in the modern era it's too confusing. Some blame could also be placed on the trailers. Although the giants look good in the context of the film, from the trailers a lot of the shots border on the uncanny valley, and the BFG looked more creepy rather than friendly. Additionally, the film lacked some star power. It's not like movie stars alone can carry a film in current Hollywood, but some A-listers could have boosted the movie at least a little. I like that this film stars lesser-known actors, but I think it could have helped. If only we saw the version of the movie with Robin Williams. That could have been amazing. Lastly, although the reviews were decent, they weren't great, and it wasn't enough to inspire the word of mouth to get families to flock to the theater, especially when Finding Dory was playing at the same time. Families would rather go see this movie based on a brand they already know than take a chance on the BFG. Speaking of reviews, let me share some of my personal thoughts on the movie. As a whole, I did not enjoy the BFG. It was one of those movies where I found myself constantly looking at my watch, waiting for it to end. However, there are still great aspects found in the movie where I could see it working for many people. Spielberg does his best to squeeze some heart and whimsy out of this movie, and that's really where the film shines. The relationship between Sophie and the BFG is well done and very sweet. Mark Rylance did a great job at making you feel for the BFG, and Ruby Barnhill is a solid lead. It's a big task throwing a kid in a room full of green screen and asking her to react to a CGI giant, but she did a great job at making it feel believable, and the visual effects crew did a decent job at blending her into the environment. Not all of it is seamless, but it works for the vibe this film is going for, and as a whole, I thought the visual effects were good. There's also a handful of visually interesting sequences which inspire that classic Spielberg wonder and excitement. The ones that stand out to me are the sequence where they capture the dreams in the Upside Down world and a scene where they craft a dream for the Queen. Lots of cool stuff going on in this movie. The stellar cinematography makes the painfully boring plot almost bearable. Almost. The central issue I have with the BFG is that there isn't enough story for the size of the movie Disney wanted. This results in many scenes and sequences that could have been interesting being stretched as far as they could go until they all ended up boring. Just as Bilbo Baggins would say,
sort of stretched like butter scraped over too much bread.
The movie has a hard time getting to the point. For example, take this scene where Sophie and the BFG have breakfast with the Queen and talk to the military about what they're going to do about these other bad giants. How long do you think this scene would be? 5 minutes? Maybe 7 minutes tops. No, this scene is an indulgent 10 minutes long. For reference, this scene in the 1989 animated film is only 6 minutes long. I know a 4-minute difference doesn't seem that extreme, but it's emblematic of a bigger issue. When each little scene is treated this way, it results in the film moving at a snail's pace. When all the big plot beats are stretched out like they are in this movie, it gives off the impression like nothing is happening, even though that might not be the case. A majority of this film is just Sophie and the BFG hanging out in Giant Land, and then in the last 30 minutes, they decide they should probably do something about these other mean giants, then go talk to the queen. This works well for a children's novel, but when you adapt it into a 118-minute feature film, it doesn't quite land as well. And the whole climax of the movie is also really underwhelming. I was just expecting more, or maybe expecting a bigger struggle. It seems like they solve their issues like that, you know? The last problem I have with this film is a very subjective one, and that's the humor. I didn't find any of the comedy in this movie amusing, and that's probably because the intended demographic is kids, and I'm a 24-year-old man. But still, if you are banking on making back that hefty $140 million budget, you need to have something of substance for every demographic to enjoy. The farting CGI corgis just didn't do it for me. I'm sorry guys, I know I'm a stick in the mud. As a whole, I was just expecting a lot more out of this movie, since I really enjoyed the source material as a kid, and I really love Spielberg's work, but there's just something so plain about this movie. You know, it's just boring. Disney's The BFG was a box office bomb many years in the making. After failed attempts at trying to adapt the story to the big screen in the 90s, the movie finally saw the light of day in 2016 with Spielberg at the helm. However, due to many factors ranging from competition at the theater, to a poor title, to just being an okay film, the movie bombed at the box office and lost the company upwards of $100 million. So that's the story behind the failure of Disney's The BFG. But what are your thoughts on the film? Have you seen it? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. This has been Tom from Isenhart Productions, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week. Here's a clue for next week's video. I really need to start making a bingo card of cliches when I watch these terrible YA movies. I would have several bingos by now.